If you can not just commit to attending your caucus, but you can take just one more action. Ask that neighbor who has talked to you about supporting Bernie if you can carpool with them to caucus. Go down to the Monroe office and see if you can do get out to caucus calls or door knocks. Commit to taking Bernie's message directly to the doorsteps and dinner tables of caucus goers. And with that, it is my distinct honor to introduce someone who will deliver on a promise to give everyone in Spokane a chance to thrive, the next President of the United States, Bernie Sanders.
Thanks for being here. Let me thank Abigail Crawford. Let me thank Deanna Brown and Marcus Riccelli for that wonderful introduction. Marcus, thank you so much. Okay, let's get to business. Here is the business. Number one, we are all going to do everything that we can to make certain that a Republican does not occupy the White House. And in order to do that, we need the strongest Democratic candidate possible. And you are looking at him. Now, you know, campaigns are funny things, and a lot of people say a lot of things. And there are people who, for very good reasons, like Hillary Clinton, and that's fine, people who like me, and that's fine. But by 6 points to John Kasich, we were beating him by 6 points. Ted Cruz is running hard. Ted Cruz was tied 48-48 with Hillary Clinton. We beat Cruz by 13 points. So I think that is one issue that we got to clear the air with. We are the strongest candidate. And if people are worried about that, as they should, we're going to work together to get the nomination. Number two, we are gaining a lot of momentum. Just in the last week, we have closed the gap with Secretary Clinton by about 25 delegates. We won overwhelming, unbelievable victories in Utah and Idaho with over 75% of the vote. And while we lost in Arizona, you add all that together and you add Democrats abroad, I think we gained about 25 delegates in the last week. And now we are coming to the great state of Washington on Saturday morning. What we have found in this campaign is something very interesting, and that is we do well when there is a large voter turnout. We do poorly when there is a low voter turnout. In other words, when working class people and young people, people who have not often been involved in the political process, stand up and come out, we do well. But when they don't, we don't. So I would ask all of you on Saturday morning, I guess the caucuses begin at 10, get there earlier, bring out your friends and your uncles and your aunts. Let's have a great turnout, a record-breaking turnout in Washington on Saturday morning. Also, I did want to mention to you all that just today we received the endorsement, and I'm very proud of this, of the International Longshore and Warehouse Union. They're one of the great and important unions on the West Coast, and we thank them for their support, as we do many of the other unions that are supporting us. Okay. Now, what this campaign is about, and why I believe we are doing as well as we are, is we are treating the American people with intelligence. And maybe even more radically, for modern politics, we are telling the truth. Now, what the truth is, whether it's in our personal lives or whether it's in our political lives, the truth is not always pleasant. So I can come before you and tell you some jokes and tell you about all the people who are supporting me. And maybe we have some music and all that stuff, and I get votes. But that's not what we're trying to do. What we are trying to look at the harsh realities of American life. And by the way, those realities do not appear on television very often. And one of the points that we have made throughout this campaign is when we deal with the reality of American life, you can't count on media to tell you that reality. You have got to go into your own hearts and souls and determine what that reality is. You make that reality. You analyze that reality, not the stuff that you see on television, because that often is not the reality facing this country. So in a sense, in a very profound sense, what this campaign is redefining reality. All right, what is reality in America today? Number one, everybody here in this room believes in democracy. We appreciate so much, and I speak to you as the former chairman of the Senate Committee on Veterans Affairs, we appreciate so much the sacrifices men and women in the military have made for so long in defending American democracy. I was in San Diego the other day, and I was introduced to a man in a wheelchair. I believe he is in his late 90s, and he fought in World War II. And you get chills in your own body meeting somebody whose courage has helped save America. But when we talk about democracy and the sacrifices that so many people have made, here is a truth that everybody here has got to appreciate, not a pleasant truth. And that is, as a result of this disastrous Supreme Court decision on Citizens United, we now have a corrupt campaign finance system which is undermining American democracy. Democracy, we have had a long, long road that we've traveled since the inception of this country in terms of what democracy means. You all know that when this country was founded, the only people who could vote were wealthy white males. And the struggle for hundreds of years has been to expand democracy. That has been the struggle. And yet today, as a result of this Citizens United Supreme Court decision, what we are seeing is billionaires buying elections. And what this campaign is about is asking the American people not to take what we see in front of us, the status quo of our lives. Don't believe that that has to be the status quo in years to come. We can make change. So when you read in the paper that the Koch brothers or some other billionaires are spending hundreds of millions of dollars, do not accept that as what American politics should be about. When billionaires buy elections or try to buy elections, that is not democracy, that is oligarchy. And we will not allow that to take place. And when we talk about democracy, it is important for all of us to know that we as a nation, one of the great democracies in the world, Today, we have one of the lowest voter turnouts of any major country on earth. And despite that, what you're seeing all over this country is Republican governors trying to suppress the vote. What we want to do is get more people to participate in the political process. They want fewer people. So they are passing all kinds of legislation that makes it harder for people of color, makes it harder for young people, for old people, for poor people to vote. And that is absolutely disgraceful. And I say to those Republican governors, those cowardly Republican governors, if you are afraid to participate in a free and fair election where everybody can vote, you should get out of politics and get another job. Now, just give you an example, and I honestly do not know, and hopefully there will be an investigation on this, and I would like to see this investigation. As you know, just on Tuesday, there was an election, primary election in Arizona. People were waiting online for 5 hours to cast a ballot. 5 hours. We received an email from a friend of a staff member of mine, waiting online 5 hours, and there were people behind her. Now, whether this was intentional or it was just incompetence, I don't know. But when people show up at the polls, they should be allowed to vote and not have to spend half their day waiting for that. And that is why, together, one of our great missions, and it ties into everything else, if we have a large voter turnout, if working class people and young people participate, in November of 2014, the last general election we had, 63% of the American people didn't vote, 80% of young people didn't vote. All right? And surprise, surprise, Republicans won a landslide victory, and that's what they want. They want people not to vote. They want big money to buy elections. Well, on Saturday, let's send them a message. We are going to vote. There is a lot of talk lately about Supreme Court nominees, and I certainly support the president's effort to get his nominee seated. But let me say this. The nominees that I will bring forth to the Supreme Court will have to be loud and clear. They will vote to overturn Citizens United. But when we talk about what's going on in this country, not just a corrupt campaign finance system, not just a low voter turnout, it is also a rigged economy. A rigged economy. What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is what you're, again, not going to see terribly often on television. And that is that we have the most grotesquely unfair distribution of wealth and income of any major country on earth. Now, you know, in every society, and probably it always will be, they're going to be rich and poor and people in the middle. But here is what you got today in America. You have the top 1/10 of 1%, not 1%, 1/10 of 1% now owning almost as much wealth as the bottom 90%. And if you think about it, that is pretty unbelievable. And then you got the top 20 people owning more wealth than the bottom half of America, 150 million Americans. Now, when you talk about the rigged economy, it is not only distribution of wealth and income. That's part of it. But it is the fact that the rich get richer while many people in the middle class and working class get poorer. Let me give you one example of what I mean. And I could give you a dozen. But here's one example. The wealthiest family in America is who? Anyone know? Good. Smart group of people. Walton family owning Walmart is the wealthiest family in America. The wages that they pay their workers are so low that many of their employees are forced to go on food stamps, Medicaid, and subsidized housing. Here is what a rigged economy is about. Who pays in higher taxes for that Medicaid and food stamps for those workers? You do. So here is one of many examples where the middle class pays more in taxes to subsidize the company owned by the wealthiest family in America. That's absurd. Working families should not have to subsidize a multi-billionaire family. And I say to the Walton family, get off of welfare, pay your workers a living wage. And again, when we think outside of the box, ask yourself this question. In the last 20 or 30 years, there has been an explosion of technology. Every worker, well, not every, but almost every worker in America produces more than those who came before them. So if you think about it for a second, if I give you a tool that makes you much more productive, one of two things might happen. You're producing more, you're going to work fewer hours, or you'll work the same hours and make more money. The truth is, for many millions of people in this country, the very opposite is true. Despite increased worker productivity, people are working longer hours for lower wages. You got all people in my state. It is certainly not uncommon in Vermont, and I suspect it's common here in Washington. People working not one job, they're working two jobs, they're working three jobs. We don't talk about it at all. Media does not discuss it, but people in America, our people, work the longest hours of any people in the industrialized world. Japanese are very hard workers. We work longer hours than the Japanese. You got mom out working, you got dad out working, you got the kids out working, and yet 58% of all new income generated today goes to the top 1%. So here is a radical idea. You ready for a radical idea? Together, what we will do is create an economy that works for everybody, not just the 1%. And we know what we have to do. We know what we have to do. Among other things, we have got to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour. And we are going to tell the very, very wealthy who are doing phenomenally well in large multinational corporations, guess what? You are going to start paying your fair share of taxes. But when we talk about basic and fundamental problems facing our country, it is the state of our democracy and a corrupt campaign finance system. It is a rigged economy in which for 30 years, middle class has been declining. We have 47 million people living in poverty. We have the highest rate of childhood poverty of almost any major country on earth. But it is not just that. Then you got to go to another issue, and that is a broken criminal justice system. So what we've got to think about there is, why is it that in the wealthiest nation in the history of the world, that is the United States today, why do we have more people in jail than any other country? Why do we have 2.2 million people in jail, and why are we spending $80 billion a year to lock up fellow Americans? All right, a lot of reasons for it, but let me start off with one. Again, this is an issue you don't see on media, not at all. So the point that I'm making over and over today, we have got to go into our own hearts and souls and say, what is the reality of America? So here's one of the aspects of the reality of America not talked about at all on media. And that is that for kids who graduate high school, not drop out, between 17 and 20, unemployment rates are unimaginably high. If you are a white kid, 33%. A Latino kid, 36%. African American kid, 51%. We have millions of young people today not in school, not on jobs, not working in jobs, hanging out on street corners, and some of them are getting into trouble. So here is radical idea number 2, and that is we're going to invest in our young people in education and jobs, not jails. Not jails, not incarceration. It is a lot cheaper, it really is, to send a young person to the University of Washington than to lock him up. And that's what I would prefer to do. The criminal justice, and for more information, go to my website, berniesanders.com, because this is a very important issue, a lot of aspects to it. But in addition to that, all of us are tired of seeing on television unarmed people being shot by police officers. Now, I have been a mayor for 8 years, and I've worked with police officers all over my state and all over this country. The truth is, the vast majority of police officers are honest, and they are hardworking, and they have a very difficult job. It is not easy being a police officer today. But, like any other public official, when a police officer breaks the law, that officer must be held accountable. We have got to demilitarize local police departments. We have got to make police departments look like the diversity of the communities that they serve. And here is another issue. It's controversial, but this is what I believe. And that is we have to rethink the so-called war on drugs. What does that mean? What it means is that over the last 30 years, millions of people in this country have received police records for possession of marijuana. And a police record is no laughing matter, because if you're young, you go walking into an employer, you want a job, and the employer asks you about your record, you got to talk about it. And that makes it harder for you to get that job. If you don't get a job, you don't have income. If you don't have income, you're going to do something in order to survive. Now, right now, under the Federal Controlled Substance Act, some of you may know it, most of you probably don't, marijuana is listed as a Schedule I drug right alongside of heroin. That does not make sense to me, and that's why I've introduced legislation to take marijuana out of the Federal Controlled Substance Act. Further, when we talk about drugs, we have a very serious problem in my state of Vermont, neighboring New Hampshire, all over this country. We have an epidemic of addiction to opiates, addiction to heroin, and we are losing people every single day to overdoses. People are overdosing. Now, what I think is when we look at substance abuse and addiction, we have got to look at it as a health issue, not a criminal issue. Which means, again, think about, if you don't do that, you got people who are addicted, they're going to go out stealing and robbing to feed their addiction, all kinds of problems. They need treatment, not jail cells. Now, this campaign is doing very well because we are listening not to campaign contributors. You cannot believe how much time candidates spend out raising money from the very, very wealthy rather than talking with their constituents. And this campaign is talking to the people. This is what we're hearing. We're hearing from working people, whether they're black or white or Latino, and what they are saying, they can't make it on $8 or $9 an hour. And that is why we have got to raise the national minimum wage to $15 an hour. This is not a radical idea. The idea that somebody who works 40 or 50 hours a week should not be living in poverty. That's what our vision is. Not a radical idea, it's an American idea. This campaign is listening to women. And what women are telling us is they are tired of going into an office or going into a company and earning 79 cents on the dollar compared to men. They want the whole damn dollar. They're right. And I know that every man here today will stand with the women in the fight for pay equity for women workers. And I'll tell you something else. Right now, you got a lot of Republicans going around this country talking about family values. They love families. Everybody here has got to know what they mean by family values. And what they mean is that no woman in this room, in this state, in this country, should have the right to control her own body. I disagree. What they mean is that our gay brothers and sisters should not have the right to be married. I disagree. This campaign is listening to young people. And I have been overwhelmed by the number of young people who are now getting involved in the political process. Young people who understand they are the future of this country and they want to shape that future. And young people are telling me, they say, Bernie, how does it happen that throughout modern history, certainly the case in my family, what the American dream has been that parents work really hard so their kids can do better than the parents. And that's the case in my family. We didn't have a whole lot of money. My dad worked really hard. My brother and I have done better. But for the first time in the modern history of this country, if we do not get our act together, the younger generation will likely have a lower standard of living than their parents. That's right. And we got to ask why that is. And the second thing that young people are saying to me is everybody told us, our parents told us, our teachers told us, media told us, everybody told us that we need to get the best education that we can, right? That education is obviously important to us as human beings. Learning is inherent in who we are as humans. But on top of that, in a competitive global economy with all kinds of new technology, we have to get all of the education and training that we need in order to get the good jobs that are out there. And then young people say to me, well, we did that. We did what we were supposed to do, but now we find ourselves in $30,000, $50,000, $100,000 in student debt. How many people here have student debt? Whoa, okay. So the question that we have got to ask ourselves is, why are we punishing people for doing what they should be doing as Americans? Our job as a society is to say to all people, not just young people, middle-aged people, Talked to a woman the other day, 45, 50 years of age. She's in college. And that's what we should be doing. We should be encouraging people to get all of the education that they need, not punishing them. So that means to me, and here's the other point, think this one through. 100 years ago or so or longer, very smart people, brave people said, you know what? All of our children, not just the wealthy, should be able to get an education. And we are going to make public schools free for first grade through 12th grade. And that was an extraordinary development. But today, in 2016, the world is different than it was 50 years ago. 50 years ago, you had a high school degree, you were in pretty good shape. You can go out and get a good job. The world, the economy, technology has changed. And that is why I believe that when we talk about public education today, it is not good enough to talk about first grade through 12th grade. It must include free tuition at public colleges and universities. This is not a radical idea. It's not something, I thought of the other day. This exists in Germany today. It exists in other European countries. It exists in Scandinavia. They are smart enough to be investing in their young people so that the economy they will have in future years will be strong. We should do the same thing. And then we have, in addition, we have millions of people today carrying horrific levels of student debt, which they are paying off over decades. I talked to a guy in Nevada many, many months ago. He has been paying off his student debt for 25 years. That debt is higher today than it was when he took it out. I talk to people who have become doctors and dentists, and God knows we need a lot of doctors and we need a lot of dentists. They are leaving school hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. So what we have got to do is give those people the opportunity to refinance their loans at the lowest possible interest rates, substantially lowering student debt. This campaign is listening to our Latino brothers and sisters.
The other stream we had of it is just really chopped up and crap. So I'm not sure I want to cut to that. I'm going to stay. Wow. I'm surprised. That sucks. That's really unfortunate. Let me try to reload it again. I'm sorry, folks. That was a really great speech. Really good, clear signal. You guys have somewhere else you're going here? Let me take a look real quick. Yeah, this happens. I'm sorry, guys. This is what happens. Fox 10 is good. It's amazing. Believe it or not, Fox 10 is great. They've been delivering the majority of our feeds lately. While we've had other copies, other feeds presented, the majority of our feeds have been from Fox 10, and it looks like something happened to their equipment. I don't know what's going on, and I'm going to drop that down.
Of people end up in jail rather than.
And also, I don't know where they were in the feed, how far delayed or ahead they were. So
they are absolutely right. It is time to change our national priorities. It is time to invest in our inner cities rather than give tax breaks to billionaires.
Well, that didn't last long over there. Oh, here we go.
That we have treated Native Americans is asphalt. And this goes back to obviously, before the beginning of our country. Native American people have been cheated, have been lied to, their treaties have been abrogated, and now is the time to change our policies toward the Native American people. Just think for a moment what we owe the first Americans in terms of the best aspects of our culture. Who has taught us more about respect for the environment and working with nature, not against nature? If elected president, there will be a fundamental change in the relationship of the U.S. government to the Native American people. I am a member of the U.S. Senate Committee on the Environment, and I will tell you what most of you already know, and that is the scientists are virtually unanimous. Climate change is real. And it is caused by human activity, and it is already doing devastating harm in this country and around the world. And what the scientists tell us, if we do not get our act together in a very
Can you feel the burn? The Bernie Sanders campaign thinks you can, so much so that they've announced the man himself is coming back to
What we are going to see is more drought, floods, extreme weather disturbances, acidification of the ocean, rising sea levels, and more international conflict as people fight for limited natural resources. In my view, and this is not just an American issue, this is a global issue, we have the moral responsibility to leave this planet in a way that is healthy and habitable to future generations. That is my view, is that health care is a right of all people, not a privilege. And my view is there is something absurd when the United States is the only major country on earth that does not guarantee health care to all people. Today, despite the gains of the Affordable Care Act, and I'm on the committee that helped write the Affordable Care Act, 29 million people still have no health insurance. Many of you and millions of other Americans are underinsured, something we talk about very little. That means you have high deductibles and you have high copayments. Is that right? And that means if you don't have any money and you have a high deductible or a high copayment, you may not go to the doctor when you should. And all of that adds up to the fact that we lose thousands and thousands of people every year who die because they walk into the doctor's office too late. And on top of all of that, you got the drug companies ripping us off in an unconscionable way, charging us by far the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs. Today in America, if you can believe it, this is how crazy it is. 1 out of 5 Americans who gets a prescription from a doctor cannot afford to fill that prescription. There are people who are dying because they cannot afford the medicine that they need, and yet last year, the 3 major drug companies earned $45 billion in profit. And then on top of all of that, the United States ends up spending much, much more per capita than do the people of any other country. 3 times, almost 3 times what the British spend, 50% more than the French, much more than the Canadians. And that is why I believe that this country must move toward a Medicare for all single-payer program. And when we do that, we're going to save the average middle-class family thousands of dollars a year in health care costs. Now, let me just take a brief moment to talk to you a little bit about some of the differences that exist between Secretary Clinton and myself. Number one, I am proud to tell you I don't have a super PAC. I don't want a super PAC. We raise our money, our campaign funding, in a way that for modern politics is revolutionary. And that is, we have now received well over 5 million individual contributions. That is more contributions than any candidate in the history of this country up until this point. Anybody here know what the average contribution is? That's right, $27. Now, I want you to think about that for a moment and the significance of that. The significance is that we are the only campaign out there that gets its financial support from working people and the middle class, not powerful special interests. To paraphrase Abraham Lincoln at Gettysburg, this is a campaign of the people, by the people, and for the people. Now, if we believe, as I do, that money in politics today has an unbelievably corrupting influence, it is important to look at how Secretary Clinton gets her campaign funds. She has several super PACs. Her largest one in the last reporting period indicated that they had received $25 million in one filing period from special interest, $15 million from Wall Street. As many of you may know, she has also given speeches on Wall Street for $225,000 a speech. Now, for $225,000 a speech, probably a pretty good speech, don't you think? Probably a speech which will reveal the darkest secrets of humanity and move us in an entirely new direction. Probably a speech written in Shakespearean prose. And that is why I think that that great speech should be made available to all of the people. And Secretary Clinton has said, well, she will make her transcripts available if everybody else does. So, let me announce to you today, I am prepared to release all of the transcripts of the speeches I gave to Wall Street. There weren't any. I don't know why, can't figure out. Wall Street has not invited me to give a speech for $225,000. I'm waiting, I got my cell phone on here. I am waiting for that call, but probably the reason I haven't gotten that call is that if I did go before Wall Street, I would release the transcript, and what that transcript would say is that at a time when 3 out of the 4 largest banks in America are bigger than they were when we bailed them out because they were too big to fail, now is the time to break up the major banks on Wall Street. Secretary Clinton and I disagree very fundamentally on foreign policy issues. We were both in Congress. She was in the Senate. I was in the House in 2002. when the most important foreign policy debate of modern history took place, and that was the war in Iraq, I listened very carefully to what Bush and Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld and all these guys had to say. I didn't believe them. I voted against the war. Secretary Clinton heard the same evidence. She voted for the war. And in a debate that we had a couple of months ago, she actually mentioned how pleased she was to get very kind words from former Secretary of State Kissinger. And that maybe tells you what her foreign policy is about. I happen to think Kissinger was one of the most destructive secretaries of state in American history. And trust me, he will not be saying very kind words about my Secretary of State. We have in this country today a major crisis in terms of clean drinking water. I believe that as soon as possible, we have got to phase out fracking. I think the evidence is overwhelming that fracking is harming our aquifers. Secretary Clinton has not only supported fracking, but as Secretary of State, tried to push that technology on other countries. We have a disagreement on that issue. Donald Trump will not become President of the United States. And he will not become president because the American people will not elect someone who insults Mexicans, who insults and denigrates Muslims. And let me be very clear. We are at war today against ISIS, a barbaric terrorist organization. We are not at war against the Muslim religion. And I do not want and will not tolerate Muslims in this country living in fear from hate language and terrible actions. Donald Trump will not be elected president because the American people will not vote for somebody who insults women. Who insults veterans. Who insults African Americans. And I hope everybody here has not forgotten the disgraceful role that Trump played in the so-called birther movement. Sometimes this was before he was a candidate, but let's not forget that. What that effort was about, which was an ugly, vicious effort, was to delegitimize President Barack Obama. That's what it was. In other words, what it wasn't saying we disagree with Obama. That's fine. We all disagree with everybody. You can do that. But what he was trying to tell the American people is that Barack Obama, our first African-American president, was not a legitimate president of the United States. That was a disgraceful act. Now, I have always found it interesting that my dad, as I mentioned before, came to this country from Poland. I am the son of an immigrant. Barack Obama is the son of an immigrant. His father was born in Kenya. I find it very interesting. Nobody has asked me for my birth certificate. think it might have something to do with the color of my skin. I think so. Trump will not be elected president because the American people instinctually, in a very deep sense, understand that bringing our people together, black or white or Latino, Asian American, Native American, bringing our people together, gay and straight, men and women, people born in America, people who have come to America, that effort of creating a cohesive nation will always trump dividing us up. And the American people will not elect Trump because they understand that in this country, we are at our best when we support each other, we help each other. When I'm there for you and you are there for me, when we're there for each other's kids. That sense of togetherness trumps selfishness. And most importantly, I think the people of our great nation have learned much from all of the great religions in this world, whether it is Christianity or Judaism or Islam or Buddhism, whatever it may be. And at the end of the day, what all of these religions say is that love trumps hatred. My friends, we are at a moment in history where our country can no longer support establishment politics or establishment economics. We need to go beyond the status quo. We need a political revolution where millions of people become deeply engaged in the political process and the fight for the future of our nation. No president, not Bernie Sanders or anybody else, can do it alone. The powers of Wall Street, of the pharmaceutical industry, of corporate America, of wealthy campaign contributors, of the corporate media are so great that no president can do it alone in terms of doing what has to be done for the middle class and working people of this country. The only way, and I'm the only presidential candidate who will tell you this, the only way we transform America is when millions of people from coast to coast stand up and say loudly and clearly that we need a government that represents all of us, not just a handful of wealthy campaign contributors. On Saturday morning, there will be a lot of delegates at stake here in the great state of Washington. I believe that the ideas and the issues we are raising have the support of the overwhelming majority of the people. If you and all Washingtonians come on out on Saturday morning, we are going to win a major victory here, and Washington will be a major step forward to the White House. Thank you all very much.